Thank you, Dr. Daniel, for those kind words of introduction, to President Farrar, to Dr. Edwards in his absence, and the entire team. I appreciate your invitation to address you this evening. Mahatma Gandhi spoke prophetically when he said, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed." I stand on the established protocols and I bid you all good evening. It is a privilege to speak briefly today, this evening, on climate change, resilience, and energy sources, case of the Bahamas as a Caribbean country and a small island developing state. Small island developing states, like Caribbean nations, are particularly vulnerable to the complications of climate change. We are confronted with rising sea levels, coastal erosions, migration, flooding, heat waves, frequent and more intense hurricanes, bizarre and unusual weather patterns, health challenges, ecosystems, compromise, and agricultural destruction. These harsh changes create high deficits and debt burdens, inflationary pressures, economic and fiscal downturns, loss of life, livelihoods, industries, and communities. Rebuilding and restoration requires borrowing that increases the national debt, resulting in a vicious cycle of borrowing to rebuild and recover, borrowing to rebuild and recover. Interest rates on borrowing are also negatively impacted because lenders' prices factor in future climate risk. Invariably, small island states are paying for hurricanes in the past, in the present, and in the future. Admittedly, a disproportionate burden to bear. According to the UN Disaster Risk Reduction, during the years 2000 to 2022, Latin America and the Caribbean is the second most disaster-prone region in the world, with 190 million affected by 1,534 disasters. Globally, women are disproportionately affected by poverty, and this is only exacerbated by the impact of climate-related and other disasters. A UNICS report found that an estimated 761,000 children were internally displaced by storms in the Caribbean between 2014 and 2018, the hottest 5-year period on record. This is an increase of 600,000 compared to 175,000 children displaced in the preceding year period from 2009 to 2013. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF, reminds us that a climate crisis is a child rights crisis and that children in a storm and flood-prone nations around the world are among the most vulnerable to having their lives upended. Undoubtedly, the adverse impact of climate change threatens small island developing states' rights as provided in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, basic human rights, including a right to a healthy environment, a right to life, a right to liberty, a right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being, a right to water, and a right to self-determination. The climate crisis has also caused limited capacity for catastrophic property insurance, which make insurance unavailable or unattainable by many who seek catastrophic insurance. Even more alarming is the fact that, for the first time, global warming has exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius for an entire year. The threshold for avoiding the most damaging impacts. To the Caribbean and countries like the Bahamas, this is shocking, alarming, and a clarion call for climate action defined by innovation, accelerated change, and a firm commitment to criminal justice. With these ever-present realities, the United Nations consider the Caribbean to be ground zero in the global climate emergency. Included in ground zero is the Bahamas, an archipelago of 700 islands and keys. We are low-lying, with each island surrounded by vast ocean, making us even more vulnerable to the impact of climate change due to rising sea levels and ocean temperatures. We continue to bear the brunt of a crisis that we did not create. Can I say that again? We continue to bear the brunt of a crisis that we did not create. In October 2016, Hurricane Matthew, the most powerful hurricane of the season, made a direct hit on Grand Bahama, causing extensive damages. In September 2019, just 5 short years ago, monster Category 5 Hurricane Dorian became the strongest Atlantic hurricane on record to directly make landfall. Hurricane Dorian devastated the Bahamas' second and third largest economic centers, leading to a significant economic hardship at the start of the decade. The Inter-American Development Bank estimated that the Bahamas sustained $7.7 billion in economic losses in the past decade alone, emanating from the impact of extreme storms like Dorian and Matthew, with the 2019 Hurricane Dorian costing the Bahamas an estimated of $3.4 billion. These hurricanes leave a trail of death, with the official death count not always quantifiable or small in comparison to the actual number of related deaths. For example, a true and personal story here. During Hurricane Dorian, my favorite maternal aunt drowned as a direct result of the storm surges in Hurricane Dorian, which were around 18 feet. Upon hearing of a tragic demise, her younger sister passed within 3 days. My aunt's husband, who did his best to rescue her, experienced a fatal heart attack 2 years later after her death. He remained haunted by the events of Hurricane Dorian until his dying day. What is the death count, you may ask, for our family? Is it 3 or is it really 1? This is not just my story, but this is multiplied by many others in both Abaco and Grand Bahama and the wider Caribbean and small island developing states. Hurricane and natural disasters have caused destruction to the Bahamas' infrastructure, the environment, communities, agriculture, coral reefs, ecosystem, the fishing industry. We have also experienced loss of livelihood and industries, increased mental health cases, all of which slows the pace of national development and advancement. Resilience and advancement means more than rebounding from hurricanes and natural disasters, but rather resilience means being proactive and investing in the appropriate infrastructure and seeking climate change justice. It is against this backdrop that the Caribbean nations must remain resilient and forge ahead, despite the fact that Caribbean countries contribute the least to the climate crisis, but bears the biggest burden of climate change. Bahamians are a resilient people. The Bahamas is taking a proactive approach. In an attempt to reduce carbon emissions, the current Bahamas government established a nationwide comprehensive energy reform dubbed New Energy Era in the Bahamas. The Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Brave Davis Casey, gave the keynote address at Climate Change Week in New York and proudly highlighted the fact that the Bahamas has committed to nationally determined contributions and set a goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 30% and transitioning to renewable energy by 2030. In so doing, we are transitioning away from fossil fuel dependence, prioritizing energy efficiency upgrades across the nation, installing utility-scale solar farms in the capital, and bringing hybrid grids online in the Family Islands. This transition is not just about cleaner energy, it is about creating jobs, fostering local expertise, and producing a more resilient infrastructure for the future. We are also pioneering ocean thermal energy conversion, harnessing the natural power of the ocean to provide clean energy, desalinated water, and even cooling. This groundbreaking technology, which is actively piloted across 9 Bahamian islands, showcases the immense potential of future-based solutions to address multiple facets of climate crisis. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas has been one of the few countries to establish and pioneer blue carbon credits. A significant resource is the Bahamas seagrass meadows, which cover over 92,000 square kilometers and absorb as much or even more carbon than the Amazon rainforest. The government of the Bahamas is working along with the International Monetary Fund so that blue carbon credits could be established as an asset class. The government is working with scientists and an independent verification company to methodically map and quantify the seagrasses. It is hopeful that the Bahamas will properly be compensated for the impact of seagrass in removing carbon from the atmosphere. It is also our intention to fully convert to LNG over the next 2 years, and also to implement the retention of an owner's engineer to ensure that all projects and initiatives are implemented to the highest international standard. From a legislative perspective, amendments would be made to the Electricity Act and the establishment of a new LNG Act. The Bahamas is also a strong view of the philosophy that the polluter should pay. Therefore, payments should be made to vulnerable populations by countries who contribute the most to carbon emissions. The fund should be returned to the populations and communities that are hardest hit. This concept is enshrined in the Bahamas Environmental Planning and Protection Act, which establishes the Environmental Administration Fund. The fund will hold fees and fines collected from environmental crimes and will assist impacted communities and industries and assist with disaster recovery efforts. The Bahamas is also committed to developing an insurance product which will be funded by the private industry and industrialized states. The United Nations passed a resolution requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the obligations of states in respect of climate change. The Bahamas fully supports this resolution and submitted a written statement in support of the advisory opinion calling for differentiated responsibilities based on proportional contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions. The brief will be presented at the end of 2024 to the International Court of Justice. Lastly, the Loss and Damage Fund was established by the United Nations on the principle that the polluter pays. This refers to the fact that wealthy, high-emission countries should pay for the impact caused by their pollution. A pledge of $800 million was made towards the Loss and Damage Fund. Indeed, this is a theoretical step in the right direction, but the question is, how do we motivate? How do we compel countries to provide the pledged financial resources to the Loss and Damage Fund? That is the overriding question. That the Bahamas, like other Caribbean and small developing nations, are making measurable strides in the right direction. We understand the fierce urgency of now and the fact that we are in a race against time. Sustainability, the future of humanity, and the very survival of small island developing states, including the Caribbean, is critical and dependent on urgent climate reforms. Globally, we must coexist in order to have a sustainable Earth. The vulnerability of small island developing states should never, ever be forgotten. We need less carbon footprints by industrialized countries and more climate financing by industrialized countries. We need less greed and more debt forgiveness and a change of attitude. We need transformation, innovation, preservation, and reform. We need these tangibles urgently because time is running out. We all have a right to human existence in honor and dignity. I thank you.